Is it really surprising I'm giving this movie a positive review when this is literally the color palette of the film? Her Private Hell is directed by Nicolas Winding Refn, and it stars Sophie Thatcher as this girl named Elle, who lives in this futuristic vaporwave-esque world where she seems to be an actor of sorts, who also happens to have some strange tension with her father. In the midst of all this, there seems to be a slasher known as the Leatherman lurking in the shadows. That is the most simple way I could put the plot of this movie, but let's be real here, this is an art house film by Nicolas Winding Refn. This isn't a film worth pitching as a brief plot synopsis, but more an ambiguous art piece meant to be thought, picked apart, and looked at for days, maybe even months, maybe even years. So to give an immediate review right after coming home from the theater of this movie might sort of defeat the purpose that this type of film serves, but at the same time, this is absolutely the type of filmmaking I want to promote and discuss on this channel. I can see this being something where my thoughts, opinions, emotions evolve over time. I think a lot of the best works of art stick with us long after the initial consumption of the product. But yeah, my immediate reaction, I absolutely love Her Private Hell, which kind of seems to be a bit of a hot take. I've only seen a couple Winding Refn films before then. He's always been a blind spot that I've wanted to study more because he seems to be one of the more popular art house auteurs working today. Of course, I've seen Drive. Everyone has seen Drive. Drive is phenomenal. I've seen that movie a number of times, but I also watched Only God Forgives a long time ago and seem to remember really enjoying it. I feel like I would enjoy it more on a rewatch. I would say tonally, Her Private Hell probably aligns more with something like Only God Forgives, whereas Drive is like a quintessential film bro movie, and I feel like it works as sort of a gateway art house movie for a lot of people. This is not a film for beginners. I feel like this would not be a good place to start as far as art house cinema goes. There are certain surface level qualities to the presentation that I'd say are worth watching the movie alone for, such as its absolutely orgasmic visuals on display, absurdly strong use of color, lighting, fantastic set design. A lot of these futuristic sets almost feel Kubrickian in the way that they're shot. Lots of still wide shots that really make you feel like you're there, but also lull you into a liminal dreamlike state. I will say this is a film I had to trust because yeah, aside from its visuals and that dreamy, hazy state I was in watching it, which was certainly entrancing, I do need to note that it took me a bit to realize exactly how I felt about the movie. It's absolutely a slow burn. I think you might go into something like this expecting that. There were moments of this film, especially during the second act middle portion, where I was thinking, okay, where is this going? What is Winding Refn saying here? And I wasn't quite sure if I was fully invested, but in the end, it totally paid off for me. Aside from that, there's a lot of weirdness early on in terms of the eccentricity of these characters, and some of their performances seem very strange and campy to the point where I was almost making comparisons in my brain to Megalopolis, which was also this crazy, ambitious project from an auteur director. I would argue that the dialogue in Megalopolis is far, far worse and less competent than anything you'll hear in Her Private Hell, but there are definitely a couple lines and moments of dialogue delivery that left me scratching my head a bit. That is until I saw what this movie was going for and I stuck through to the end to see what the thesis of this film was really trying to be. And with art films like this, I do feel like it's very much in the eye of the beholder. I feel like this could mean several different things to many different people, and this is in no way meant to be a scene-by-scene breakdown or in-depth analysis of any kind. As far as my new release reviews go, I try to keep it spoiler-free and just try to explain my general experience to see if you could compare it to your own taste and sensibility so you could determine whether or not you would enjoy it. And let me just say, obviously, if you can't tell from the reception of the film, this is certainly not for everyone. I would totally understand if someone watched this and was like, wow, worst movie I've ever seen, holy fuck. But at first where I was sort of thinking this is Winding Refn's Megalopolis, eventually as the film played out, I realized no, this is more like Winding Refn's Persona. As the movie starts shifting perspectives at a certain point, characters begin to blend together in really interesting narrative ways. I mentioned Sophie Thatcher's character was an actor. There is this small subplot involving her making this movie with a few other characters. There's a scene in this movie where it just becomes the film that they're filming within the movie, and it's this overtly campy, almost Star Trek parody, which This movie already had a science fiction setting to an extent, so seeing how that was paralleled within the film they were shooting, I feel like could cue us into the level of camp portrayed in other scenes, as we're supposed to parallel it to the real world emotions being portrayed. And in general, the slasher setup felt very giallo to me, so I also feel like the camp was sort of a tribute to that, and I also feel like this film is saying, yes, it's important and awesome to explore real themes within filmmaking and art, but it's also okay to bask in the exploitation or the guilty pleasure qualities of art. I sense this running theme of deconstructing escapism through entertainment. We have this Leatherman character paralleled with this GI character looking for his missing daughter and going on this violent spree, which is directly paralleled with Elle, so you sort of get to see all different perspectives of how people have dealt with their inner turmoil in life. And going back to the subplot of Sophie Thatcher's character filming this movie, there's this weird element involving this stepmom character of hers, who also happens to be her own age, and like they used to be really close friends, I guess you could say. I know, it's a weird movie, it's a lot to explain. But there's a lot of tension between these characters for obvious reasons, and the two of them are in this movie together, but then there's one scene where I feel like the line may have been a little obvious, but it was totally cueing this into being a more meta narrative, where Elle says something to the effect of, you know, I don't think this movie is gonna fix us, which allowed me to step outside of the film for a second and think about how it's operating within the real world. What is that trying to say about the way audiences view art? Because yeah, I feel like art is often used for escapism, to run away from real world problems we may be dealing with on a daily basis. Meanwhile, those problems aren't being solved in the process, and if we don't try to deal with them in their own way, they will return to the surface and maybe even worsen the longer it goes on without being confronted. Sophie Thatcher's performance is fantastic in this movie because a lot of it is just in her face, and you just see how much emotion she's bottling in throughout this film, and then as it plays out, we start to see certain layers of that getting unraveled. But not to get into specifics, I feel like in the end this movie is trying to express this theme of self-awareness, self-discovery, as well as forgiveness of oneself. There's a very beautiful scene where no dialogue is exchanged and you just sort of see the characters emoting certain things, and I thought just what it was able to say visually alone and just with the actors' expressions was really profound. I found it very moving. There's a lot to chew on here. I feel like there are many different interpretations that could come from a movie like this if you do allow yourself to engage with it. In the end, I sort of think this is Nicolas Winding Refn's love letter to film as an art form, while also critiquing the dark sides of how art can play a role in our lives, and trying to showcase the importance of allowing art to affect you while also practicing self-care in your personal life. So much to dissect here. I don't know how good of a job I did necessarily, but this is just me coming right out of the theater. This is not gonna click with everyone, but if you do like films like this, you have to check it out. Absolutely. This is a recommendation for more hardcore film lovers or fans of art house cinema, but not exactly something I would recommend to a general audience. I'm going to give Her Private Hell a 9 out of 10. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you have a good one.